Hello and welcome to Radio Free Nintendo episode 820...
22. Yes.
All right, there you go.
822. It is May 11th, 2023, and Tears of the Kingdom is already out for Greg, and it comes out for us in an hour and 43 minutes. So we figured, what better thing can we do than make an episode that will be immediately obsolete? Well, why don't we do a retroactive? And what better thing can we do a retroactive on before Nintendo's biggest game in like 6 years than a different Zelda game? I'm joined today by the returning Iron Man, John Lindemann.
It's great to be here. Another streak starts today.
Gentlemen, as you will confirm, I did say he exactly would say that.
Yep.
Also joined by Mr. Guillaume Bayette.
I feel deja vu. Didn't we do a Wind Waker retroactive just last month?
It was 2 months ago now. But yes, we did a part 1 of our Wind Waker retroactive, but John and I hadn't...
Yeah, I mean, Guy, we're starting an Iron Man streak of Wind Waker HD retroactives.
Excellent.
Part 74 of our Wind Waker retroactive. Last but not least, joined by Mr. Greg Lay.
Ahoy, ahoy, everyone.
We're going to get right down to business. We're going to try to get through this one. It might be a little bit of a shorter episode. There are unprecedented degrees of technical hardships that have been affecting this recording session so far. So we're going to try to get through it. And also, like I said, Tears of the Kingdom will be out by the time we're done. And I want to at least touch it before I go to bed. So, Wind Waker Part 2. Whence last we all spoke as a group, I believe, was the Wind Waker retroactive.
It's true.
It's been a while since we've all been in the same call, like 5 or 6 weeks. But John and I were behind Greg and Guillaume pretty significantly. I think I had cleared about half the dungeons, and John, I think you were really just getting started.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, where are we now? I have beaten the game. In fact, I beat the game like 2 days after we recorded. I went on a run. And to sort of refresh my memory, I went back and poked at it a couple days ago in the unlockable second attire you get, just to kind of get my feet wet. Pun not intended.
Well, also
Guillaume.
that's the second sort of question where you get to like understand the previously impenetrable dialogue that like the ancient characters have between them. So
I've never actually played that run long enough to know that.
So it's like you'll get the King of Red Lions has a chat with Jabun, and originally it just appears as like hieroglyphics or whatever, kind of
right.
You don't understand what they're saying, but the second time through that you do, it's a minor thing. I think Valu is another character that you have similar dialogue with and stuff, but it's a cute addition.
Right. Is it worth doing, though?
No, I wouldn't say that. It's one of these things if you're just doing another playthrough anyway, especially because this HD version added the extra difficulty mode, so maybe you'd be more likely to play it a second time, and just it made play, as we covered in the first episode, all the ways in which it made playing through the game quicker. By, further streamlining the Triforce hunt at the end from what the North American version did to the Japanese version back in 2003, and the Swift Sail and so forth. Like, it's a relatively quick game to see the credits, so it is kind of replayable, and so you may as well do it maybe with a different difficulty and a different outfit for Link and a little bit of extra dialogue.
Yeah, the Swift Sail really did make this game just fly by. If like on the back half of the game when you're just island hopping like that, I was surprised how fast. Like, I made a lot of progress before the recording last time, and I was kind of shocked by how fast I was able to go from starting to basically halfway done. But the fact that we record Thursday night, I wouldn't have touched it that evening, and then by I think it's like Saturday evening I'd finished the game. I was kind of shocked at how quick I was able to get through the rest of it. Guillaume, how far did you get into Wind Waker? And you were playing HD as well, correct?
Yeah, and of course, I think I mentioned it last time, but I must have played through it like 2, 3, or 4 times back in the day on the GameCube. First time playing the HD version, or playing through it anyway, like I had started it but never finished it. And last time, I was maybe halfway through the Triforce collection quest. I was done with the Earth and Wind temple, yeah. And so now, like, I just picked up basically, I think just maybe 2 pieces, including the one on the ghost ship, and then I was off to the last part of the game, which I had forgotten was not just straight to a room with Ganon in it, but had a little bit more of a, I don't know, not a super long temple or anything like that, but it was long enough to annoy me before I went to bed.
Yeah. This is something that comes up in user feedback, and it's something certainly I did remember, kind of going into it. I was like, isn't this bit a bit rubbish? And it is. But for me, where we left off, I was like, in the middle of the Triforce hunt sort of phase. I could have kind of sped that up maybe to finish it sooner, but given that it was going to be, a fair few weeks, then I thought, well, let's go and map the whole thing. Let's go and get the whole C chart filled in and do some more of the side stuff, and then kind of held back on. I just completed the actual final boss fight and rolled the credits and all that earlier this week, to get at least some of it a bit fresher for when we speak.
Yeah, I can't help myself with the C chart, but my God, it's so annoying to have to just keep finding Beetle, and then he doesn't have any of the bait. And then you're just
the bait thing. There's a couple of things that kind of irk about that in terms of like the way that that it isn't just one item that you just add to. Like it's always like a discrete item of like 3 servings of bait. So you've got to kind of keep going. And luckily, the way the items are handled on the gamepad, if you play it that way, it is easy quick to switch things out from your kind of inventory onto a button, compared to what it would have been originally, but it still irks that you're doing that, especially when you're doing it in bulk, to map out the whole place.
I guess, like, if you have, like, one of a thing of bait left, like, you can just, like, use it on nothing, since you're trying to rack up points purchasing stuff from beetles anyway.
Yeah, there is that, but it's just more fiddly than it needs to be, isn't it? It's kind of minor stuff. I mean, one thing I think is really... because they fix some of these things in the HD version, like the way that in the past you had to have the sail of the boat was on an item. Like you had to specifically designate that to which pretty much like you almost always did, didn't you, when you were at sea? Mm-hmm. So like that was one item taken up. Now, like a lot of stuff like that is more contextual, or they map things to the D-pad and stuff. So like they did like make a lot of good changes in Wind Waker HD in this department. But I think one thing they could have done is just like if you've got bait anywhere in your inventory and you lock on to the fish in that particular sector, like it should just be press A to deploy bait contextually. Right. Like, I don't see why that isn't possible, and if it is possible, it should be that way, because it's, why the bloody hell not? There's loads of actions in Zelda games that are contextual, based on, the A button in Ocarina of Time, was very had to be used for a bunch of different actions, because you do so many different things in that game, and it changes contextually. That was another, they made a lot of those changes, and they deserve credit, but that was one I think that they could have done. Admittedly, it's a little bit more of a kind of narrow kind of thing, but it still would have been nice if you are actually going to kind of map out the whole thing, which, like I said, is something that I did in Wind Waker HD, the first time I played it, 10 years ago, nearly 10 years ago, and now this time, because it was just so much more doable and so much more kind of smooth compared to what it would have been on GameCube. But I'm sure, plenty of people did do that on GameCube, and it would have been even more irksome,
I did it I played that game like 4 or 5 times, and I mapped every single time. And it is very obnoxious. With the Swift Sail, at least, I can get to the damn fish quicker. Just getting to the fish sometimes was a nightmare. John, so we wrap this up. Mm-hmm. How far did you get Wind Waker?
Yeah, so last time I believe it was I just actually gotten the Wind Waker. I didn't really have a chance to get back to it much more. I did beat the first I beat the Forsaken Fortress, the dungeon with Goma at the end. I did play through all that, and then I made sure just so I could refamiliarize myself with stuff that I couldn't obviously get to. I did watch a playthrough of Ganon's Tower, like basically that all the way to the end. So basically brought back everything I'd basically forgotten about the game. So
all the memories.
Yep.
You've played it more than once, I would guess.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I played it way back in the day on GameCube.
Yeah.
So
I did mention this last time. I was kind of, with the extra time, I was hoping maybe to get a bit of time in with the GameCube version, because, like I said, obviously we talked about some of the differences. We've talked about some of the pros and cons of the changes to the aesthetic with the new version. So would have liked to play the old version, but that didn't happen, sadly. Again, you watch video and all that. But like I said, we did cover, kind of the aesthetic changes a fair bit last time, so I'm not going to dwell on them. But, I still kind of hope that version will be preserved in some way in the future. The way that obviously, we have like Ocarina 3D, but we also have Ocarina on NSO, like to preserve the way that it originally was. Or, well, something, it's not perfect, is it? Although they improved the NSO version a fair bit after they first went up. But, because some of the changes and stuff, whether they're good or bad, it kind of feels like appropriate for such a big thing, such a major milestone in Nintendo history, to have its original version preserved, even if it does have more frictions and BS and all that, especially with something as fundamental in many ways as the aesthetic is to the original Wind Waker release. It's kind of as nice as the new look is in quite a few respects. I feel like that it'd be good for people, to actually, especially considering it's never been on a system that sold that well between GameCube and Wii U. It'd be really nice if we could, even if it's just a sort of unambitious, sort of analogous to Super Mario Sunshine on the Super Mario 3D All-Stars kind of like version or something, for it to kind of have another look from people someday.
Another thing that happened between the last time and now is that I've played through the entirety of Ocarina of Time 3D, and I'm halfway through Majora's Mask 3D, so I'm kind of now, like I've played a lot of the 3D Zelda games in quick succession, but also basically all of these remakes of older Zelda games in quick succession.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think in theory, it's a good idea to, I'm not against like preserving the way that Wind Waker was on the GameCube, but at the same time, it's probably not the thing that I would recommend new players to play, like, because I think that this is the first time that I'm playing Majora's Mask and actually enjoying it. I think it has a lot to do with the improvements that it brought to in the 3D version. There's probably more improvements that they could bring, like if they were to to bring it out again, to update it again. But I can't say, as I'm playing it, I can't say I'm wishing I had played the original version. There's not.
Well, with Majora's Mask, it's some really important stuff, in terms of how much better the Bomber's Notebook is, how much more granularly you can manipulate time. So you go to much more specific spots in the calendar rather than dawn or dusk of the 3 days kind of stuff, so it made a big difference. And also it has just like much more liberal saving rather than the kind of interrupt save, which was something they put in for the American version versus the Japanese version, where you really did have to go back to the beginning of the cycle to save at all.
It would have been a nightmare.
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah. But it came in real hot, that Japanese version, April or whatever it was of 2000. That was, kind of, I guess because maybe the N64 was so kind of, minor in Japan, they felt like they had to get it out as soon as possible before that anybody had lost any interest in the machine over there. I don't know.
Well, that's true.
But so Wind Waker HD, like it's a good version. I appreciate all the improvements or fixes that it brings, but I'm not going to say it's a low effort kind of, remake, but it is. Like there are some remakes where they will actually go and fix the problem. And in this case, it feels more like, well, we put a Band-Aid on the problem, and so we hit it, or we kind of bypass it. But it feels like they didn't go too deep into what the problems were to actually try and fix them or remove them entirely. Yeah. Like the Swift sale.
Well, don't forget this is another thing that was seemingly cooked up pretty fast to have something for Wii U. The early, the first year of Wii U, so something more in depth where you're like, all right, let's actually kind of go really tinker with the insides of this thing and fix some structural problems, probably beyond the scope of the project. So yeah, there's things that, as you said, in a Band-Aid capacity that do quite a lot of good, but especially like with the Triforce Hunt element, for instance, it's like, yeah, it makes it quicker. It takes out some steps, which, like I said, the North American version had already done, but it doesn't really do the kind of substantive changes where it's just like, oh, you know what? Instead of just the same kill rooms for a good percentage of this, maybe we could come up with little puzzled shrines, to take their place. That would be something that would feel like you actually went back in there and kind of tried to, or, something really major, the bit where you just get a pearl for nothing. Actually, here's the dungeon, that clearly was meant to go there. That would have been a lot more major.
They actually came out at some point, I think maybe in Nawada Asks, or something else, but they said we can't just put back a dungeon in there because that dungeon either, doesn't exist or exists in the sequel.
They had ideas that probably got contracted into the dungeons that are in this game. And then
there's definitely some incongruencies in some of these dungeons where it's this wasn't meant to be here.
Yeah, we covered that with the two sage temples in the last episode. Yeah. Kind of
they're backwards.
The curious theming of those, but also, yeah, definitely. You know what Nintendo's if something they did have an idea, but they didn't get to fully execute on it or execute on it at all. It's we can come back to that, and then they probably did in Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword or, whatever. So, again, these are things that you might even just have to do something completely from scratch. Just invent a new dungeon if you wanted to correct for that really obvious omission that is there, that big hole that's very obviously there. And that's just beyond the scope of a project that's we need something Zelda for the first year of Wii U. So this is it, clearly.
Yeah. And it is even before I knew about the cut content, I remember playing the game the first time and going, it's awfully weird, cause it's very much, Ocarina of Time, the first set of dungeons, you collect 3 doodads from 3 dungeons, and then there's a big story progression, and then you collect more doodads from different dungeons. And it's we're doing this again because there's 3 pearls, and then they just give you the 3rd pearl, and it's that's
exactly
right.
Even dumb child me was there used to be a dungeon here, didn't there?
You didn't have to have read jack shit on the internet to be thinking that was
right.
Although in Ocarina of Time, you just get given the time medallion. You don't have to do anything about it. So.
The Sage of Light or whatever, the one that's kind of when you first
who's that
become
dude?
An adult. Yeah, it's the owl. I mean, that's that's who he's been in the story before. So you're just seeing his other kind of form. But yeah, that was a little strange. But it wasn't nearly as glaring as this. Again, because Ocarina was, I mean, that was very heavily patterned on Link to the Past. Obviously, that had 3 pendants that you got before you got the Master Sword.
Right.
And then you went to but so this was a sort of formula, but especially once you got to Wind Waker and you'd had that formula kind of twice, it felt like, a very obvious gap that,
my favorite part was my favorite part there was, how do we justify there not being a dungeon? Well, the island just got blown up. That's why.
Ganondorf just has like a sort of Death Star somewhere, that could just blow up an island. And
he just blew the whole fucking island to Kingdom Come, and Jabu left.
Was that a one-use thing?
Yeah, it's like, well, why doesn't he just use that again? I'm on a boat. He could find me really easily.
Yeah, no, and like this, it can be seen like kind of how fast they had to release it, I guess, and how incomplete the game feels. It's not just in terms of cut content, like obviously cut content, but it's kind of reflected also in the design of some of the. Well, let's say like in some of the boss fights, especially when you fight, I think it's Goma, the volcano. Yeah, so, that fight is just weird, and now I just realized I'm in the wrong Zelda Club thread on the Discord, so I can't look up my own comment about it. But I commented that it was, because, yes, we're gonna read your comments, and by your comments, I mean my comments.
My comments to you.
Yes. But all this
you
to
all
say
didn't
that,
read my comments, I will read my comments.
That fight seemed weird because you don't really have, it looks like it's going to follow the traditional Zelda boss pattern in that you've got a creature, it's got one eye, you can target it, and it's just like fighting a lot, like it's fight, like the eye is away from you. You can't throw your not the hook shot, but the other one, the
grappling hook, yeah.
The grappling hook at it.
The grappling hook.
But sometimes it will stoop down to your level. That's when you hit the eye with your sword. Except that, no, that's not what happens. This whole time, you're supposed to aim your grappling hook at the tail
Dragon's
that's
tail.
hanging from that's hanging from the ceiling, and you can basically do that at any time. You don't have to wait for the boss to stoop to your level. You can just try to aim it over its shoulder, basically.
I think it's kind of, it's
I
always,
spammed it basically one time after another.
It's kind of a cute little, riff off, as you said, at this point, especially, if you've got a good working memory of Ocarina of Time going into, playing Wind Waker, you kind of feel like you know how these things work. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, let's deviate from that in a little way, to put a bit of a wrinkle in there. But it does seem like that might work better not as the first boss. It really seemed more natural if it were, the second or the third or something. But it for the first one, it just, especially, it's essentially referencing, the first boss of Ocarina of Time in the Deku Tree is Goma, right? It's a riff on that very directly. So I suppose maybe it's kind of like, you think you know how to fight this, but you don't. But I still feel like it would be kind of more natural if it were maybe the second boss in the game. But again, does that relate at all to would there, was that always the first dungeon in the game? Before maybe others got cut, or who knows? Because obviously, the order in Ocarina of Time, was kind of, you do the forest thing first, but in this case you do the forest thing second, and then the water thing never, because, you just get it. So, I do wonder about that a little bit.
It also felt weird to me that you pull the dragon down, and that brings down, all of the ground that's around it and along with it, and then it just goes back up and plugs the hole again.
Well, you know, picks it back up. It's a plug. It's perfectly shaped.
Yeah, it just seems really weird because usually it's like when you do that, it's like you're introducing the next phase. Like you pull on the dragon's tail, and then it comes down and smashes Goma, and then the dirt falls away, and then something else happens. But this time, nope, it just goes right back up in the hole. Yeah, and you do it 3 times.
That was a weird thing to do 3 times. It's a little bit weird to me that's the thing that happens 3 times. I think.
Yeah.
Like it seems like that maybe should be like a one-off, and then you have more of an elongated battle with Goma then that has a 3 times gimmick if we must. If we've got to have one.
Yeah, exactly. And they've done this before in other Zelda games, right? Like the arena changes as you fight because it's crumbling or whatever else. So they could have done that, and it
does do that ultimately. To some degree.
Yeah, but maybe
it does. I find it weird. It feels like that should be like the preliminary phase, and then kind of fight. But then, like once you get to that point, it's like, okay, now the fight really begins. It's over. You die so fast.
Just hit him. I would like to point out though that you pull the dragon in. This is the same dragon that forces Ganondorf to flee his tower. So why the fuck can't he just deal with Goma?
I know, it doesn't entirely make sense. Maybe there's a supernatural element on top of just the fact that it's tugging on its tail and making him pissed off.
I actually have a quote here for this. I didn't intend to do this right here, but it's relevant. Noah, who writes with lots of love, quote, "One thing I cannot defend about any version of this game is the story, which manages to be both extremely thin and very bad. It is full of coincidental happenings and just-in-time good fortune. For instance, the entire plot hinges on a Rito mailman named Quill telling Tetra at the beginning of the game that she must help Link since it's her fault that Errol was taken by a giant bird. Quill coerces Tetra into taking Link along. Had he not been there, Tetra would have set sail without Link. Also, on the topic of Tetra, you mean to tell me that the badass captain pirate who's explored countless islands to pillage and is engaged in combat against monsters is content with being morphed into a frilly princess and sealed in a musty castle at the bottom of the sea," which I would point out that Ganondorf is somehow now both able to enter and able to unseal and knows she's there because, again, the entire plot of this fucking game hinges on coincidences. He's absolutely right. Nothing in this plot seems to have any, through line of somebody has a plan. It just seems lines.
Well, yeah. The problem is with any of these sorts of fantasy things, it's always destiny, isn't it?
But this one, you say that, but it feels like it's supposed to be the King of Red Lion's plan because he's there waiting for you, but it's not. He just happened to be there too. Yes. Oh, it's so stupid.
But the kind of the Ganondorf stuff, I mean, I just thought it was like, well, once you pull the sword out, what was protecting that place is gone.
Yeah, but why would he go back there? He would have had to have gone to the bottom of the ocean. What made him do that?
But he's got the portal that leads from his tower.
He was still in the tower at that point.
So, it's that bit is one of the least troublesome parts to me. It's just
I know, it's just so silly.
They kind of reinforce the idea that it's we've plucked out the sword, but actually that was kind of a bad thing because it's not even up to its full power, and now the sort of protection that it afforded is gone. So it's kind of and also that's kind of something that they is again just riffing off Ocarina of Time, isn't it? It's it's all about getting the Master Sword. There's turns out that was bad because you just opened the door for Ganondorf, and then latterly they retconned it to make it extra bad because what it was that when you pulled the Master Sword out, the spirit of demise was able to enter Ganondorf and make him more evil forever. So yeah, it's something they like, that idea, for whatever reason. It's pulling the Master Sword out it has to happen. It's part of the the kind of the destiny or whatever, but it's fraught with danger actually.
It's just the idea that this boss that you pull down was enough to drive. I mean, this is the scour. I mean, we've made these references where it's like, this is just using Lords of the Ring archetype. This is the scouring of Dol Guldur. But are we going to follow up on it? No, we've definitely solved the problem. Everything's fine now. We're not going to follow up on this in the slightest.
Anyway, as for the dragon not getting rid of Goma, I'm guessing it's because Goma is lava-proof, but I guess Ganon is not fireproof. I don't know. I don't have a big issue with it. As for coincidences,
silly. You pull him down 3 times.
Well,
make an effort.
Anyway,
man.
Yeah, no, there's like kind of the definitely a feeling of a little bit of a rush development, even though this must have been in development for years. There's also it's a product of that, and at the same time, like this is on the GameCube. This is following up the massive success of the PlayStation. And I feel like in the era of PlayStation and N64, like there was a in marketing anyway, in the way that people talked about games, like there seemed to be so much more focus on how long a game is to try to sell it to you. And I feel like that there was maybe an expectation that RPGs or that Zelda games have to be at least a certain length. And so that leads to the Triforce Hunt. That leads to the what is it? The Metroid Prime, the
artifact stuff, yeah. Which there's definitely clearly some of the same things at work there, but it certainly is more organic the way it's sort of factored into Metroid Prime, because finding those sorts of hidden items, using the full suite of skills that you've acquired in a Metroid game is kind of the essence of Metroid, right? And then now it's like, okay, it's kind of making you go back and do more of that than is usually mandatory, but it's not too big of a thing. Again, with the Triforce, I think we've got some comments that kind of touch on this. It's not really even just the aspect of like, okay, you got to find all these sea charts and you got to, you bring up the Triforce pieces from the ocean. That's like necessarily the worst part of it. Although certainly, that could be irksome in the original version in particular when you don't have a Swift sail and all that kind of thing. But the biggest problem that I have with it, and I think you've seen this in the comments reflected, is just the stuff that's just like, here's a bunch of kill rooms. Like, and then, you've got another piece to find. Oh, here's basically the same kill rooms again. I mean, it's so transparently like we've got nothing. We have no content to actually graft onto this thing. So just have a room and populate it with some enemies, one kind of enemy, and then we'll have another room, and that'll be populated with a different bunch of enemies. It's just bottom of the barrel stuff. There's no getting around it. That is true.
There's the room. I can't remember what the context is, why you have to go down there, but it's basically the infinite fights dungeon.
The trial, the something of trials or whatever.
On Outset Island.
Yeah, there's something you have to do there on the first pass through. I can't remember what it was though. Like, what do you get with the first time you run through it for like? Oh,
that
20
was
stages?
Fun. Yeah, no, that was fun. So for 50 stages, I did kill room after kill room after kill room. I got the chart, I think, or a piece of Triforce, whatever. It's the same thing. And there was a stone there where I had to use an item I didn't have yet. Nice. I think it was the hook shot and the you need the boots to be able to pull a slab of stone, and so I didn't have the boots, and so eventually, if I wanted to 100% this game, I would have to do, I guess, the 50 floors again.
Good.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've not revisited the trials.
You don't need to do all 50 to get the. You don't need to do all 50 to get the Triforce piece. But you do need to do it to get the heart or something.
Yeah, whatever's actually at the very bottom of that thing. But no, I mean, it's just the point is, I mean, we talked about a lot of this stuff in the first episode, in terms of the context of the time, the console wars and all that, but specifically, GameCube was obviously, in many ways a response to the relatively sort of unsuccessful N64, right? So N64 sold about 60% as well as Super Nintendo did, right? So it's like, okay, we need to get back on top. What went wrong? Optical media, the fact they didn't have optical media, well, we've got that, right? And the other thing they seemed to identify was that there were too many delays and there were too many gaps between significant releases on N64. So, the new storage media will help, although they had to go and complicate it somehow by making it a proprietary format that didn't have as much memory and all that, but at least it was optical. But it's like, okay, we're gonna do more working with, third-party partners, like stuff like the Capcom 5 and all that, goes to try and fill gaps in the schedule. But the other thing we're gonna do is that we are gonna get this stuff out quicker, right? And Wind Waker was quicker to GameCube than Ocarina of Time was to N64. There was 2.5 years, I want to say, between N64 launch in Japan and Ocarina of Time launching, nearly 2.5. Whereas with Wind Waker in Japan to the launch, it was 15 months. So they did it. They achieve what they want to do. So it's like, okay, we're going to get games out quicker. Then this is something they even talked about in public. So it's like, we're going to get, they might be a bit shorter in some cases, and you had things like, Pikmin and Luigi's Mansion early on that, you could have imagined them, all things being equal, sitting on those games and making them longer and making them more fully featured. But they didn't, right? Because they got them out, they needed to have content they felt early to try and build the popularity of the system. And this was going to, mean that it was going to be more popular than N64. And of course, the upshot of it all was it was less popular. It sold about 60% as well as N64 did to get a nice, even sort of pace of decline, from the Super Nintendo era. So, the point is, it was all for nothing in the end, wasn't it? The fact is, they took something with Zelda, in this case, that, yes, Ocarina, it was tortured. It's like, it's going to be a DD game. It's not a DD game. And it's delay. But then eventually it came out and but a lot of people, broadly speaking, it blew people away. It met all these crazy expectations that are built up over those years. And it was one of the most successful games on the system. With Wind Waker, the choices they made, which obviously, they also tried to compensate for by having padding like the Triforce Sun. I think it was, to its detriment because, it's one thing kind of rushing out, even like Mario Sunshine, rushing that out is one thing. Rushing a Zelda game, I think was, an interesting choice to make. And, it did hurt it in terms of that whole thing of like, oh, well, how long does it take to how epic is it? How long does it take to finish? And it hurt the quality of the game. And for me, I really like the game. I like the fact that it's quicker replayable in a lot of ways, as we talked about in the first episode, and even more so with the Wind Waker HD version. But it'll always be a case of what might have been for me. If they spend 2 full years or 2.5 on this game, how much better would it have been? How much more polished? How much more epic? Well, and, for all the strengths of the game would still have been there, it really, I think, could have stood very tall among the 3D Zeldas had that amount of care and time gone into it.
Well, and I think it's funny that we're talking about this. For your case, Tears of the Kingdom's already out. For us, it's coming out in about an hour. That they gave that game. This is the biggest Zelda success ever that it's following in. No,
we're talking about 30 million. 30 million. Now, contrast that with, for a long time, Ocarina was the commercial apex at about 7. You know, and obviously, look, like, that was pretty much incapable of selling 30 million because there were only 30 million N64s in the world, in people's homes, you know. But, you know, that it's a quantum leap in popularity, isn't it?
An incalculable success. Like, it would have been unfathomable to Nintendo that if you had told them at the peak of their powers on the Super Nintendo that they're going to release a game that's going to sell 30 million units, they would probably be dumbfounded. But that's where they got to on this one. And that game had a very long time to be made. Like, extremely long. It went from the end of development of Skyward Sword to 2016?
March of 17. March of 17, you know. Now, obviously, there were a lot of adventures that went along with that in terms of, we're developing it as a Wii U exclusive to, no, we're not.
It's going to launch on Switch.
Yeah.
And there were rumors that it was basically done in 16, but they had to sit on it for Switch. So let's say that. But that's still a very long time. They gave Tears of the Kingdom like that much time, possibly, and then some. Like a Nintendo of the N64 era, I could very much see them going like, well, we need to pull Majora's Mask. What can we get out of this engine that we've built? It's very full featured and very, there was still a lot of meat on that Bones engine. And they did a DLC package that didn't really try to do that much with it. The biggest thing to come out of that was the motorcycle that the game can't handle. And from what we've seen when the review embargo broke on this game today, is that they really have gone above and beyond what was even necessary in a follow-up to the best-selling Zelda game of all time. Like, it really feels like they said, well, that's cool, let's go do something wildly unique on that foundation. So it's very much a sea change from where they were, because you can play Wind Waker, especially if you played it, like I did chronologically, where you went Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time, Master Quest, Wind Waker. And you can feel what is ultimately a very slow and creeping progression. And it becomes particularly apparent in I can't remember what the Wii game is. The Wii launch game. Twilight Princess, yeah. Where the grand innovation was now you have 2 hook shots.
Oh, that's a big one, wasn't it?
Yeah. And the spinner that's only useful in 2 places outside of its dungeon. Total.
I will say, that in Wind Waker, with the items, early on, it's like, okay, we've got a grappling hook. It feels like, okay, well, that's sort of, obviously it's quite a bit like the hook shot, but it's somewhat different. It works somewhat differently. It has some different applications. And you get the Deku Leaf, which, clearly, has some overlap with what was going on in Majora's Mask with the Deku scrub form, the way that you kind of launch out of the plant pods and then kind of glide and stuff. So it wasn't entirely new, but again, it had some new applications with regard to like the way you could blow things. You create that big sort of force of wind to like make things like machines kind of spin or kind of propel things. So yeah, it had some new kind of riffs, and then after that, everything is just a reprise of stuff that you've seen, and it culminates basically in, you had the grappling hook before. Well, now you've literally got the hook shot, which Guillaume mentioned the one kind of wrinkle that it does have, whereas if you use the hook shot and the iron boots in combination, it's you pull things to you rather than you get pulled to the thing. Kind of, like in terms of big, heavy objects and stuff. So it did add a little bit of something, but almost
but you only
everything.
Used that like 3 times.
Yeah, it's pretty limited, and almost everything is just a callback to Ocarina. We get the same elemental arrows. We get the hammer and the iron boots and the hook shot.
The big dramatic moment in this game is literally okay. Now you're back in Ocarina.
Oh yeah, well of course. I mean that is, as I'm sure we kind of touched on last time, but we've touched on many times over the years. It's great. Like it's such a great way.
It is.
evoking that game and making it feel like this grand history and bringing you back to it and all that. But, having the items just tread the same ground. I mean, the spinner is kind of easy to, poke fun at because it's so siloed, it's just useful in that dungeon. There's a handful of things in the overworld. And I think maybe like right at the end,
the final boss fight has
Hyrule Castle and stuff. But it is very siloed. It doesn't have broad applications, but at least it felt like, what's this? Like this is at least it felt like it's actually a novel thing. Whereas, obviously a lot of the things in Ocarina you could tie them to things in Link to the Past, but in 3D for the first time. But with this, it's kind of like, we've seen these before, and so that was definitely an aspect that, especially you've had a little bit of novelty in that first half of the game, and so then when it's like, okay, second half of the game, where are we going? And it's like, Mirror Shield, remember that? Doing that again, it definitely was a little bit like, the first time we played it, it's like, it's one of the things you're kind of looking for, is it's like, okay, what kind of cool new items or new things are we going to see? And just in that second half of the game, you don't see too many.
But that's that's been kind of an ongoing problem with these more exploration focused games from Nintendo, or like power up focused games. I don't know how to call them, but like Metroid has kind of the same problem. And Metroid doesn't have the convenience of having like a new hero every generation or something. So it's like, how do we depower? At some point they were like, well, we have to deal with the fact that she's very powerful at the end of this game, and then she starts out really weak at the beginning of this game.
You're going to love the start of Tears of the Kingdom, I can tell.
Oh great.
No.
But yeah, but you do end up like rediscovering the morph ball, rediscovering the hook shot, and I don't know, like the series at a certain point maybe got a little bit too self-referential, or too this is what Zelda is, and of course that's not how the series started, right? Like with Link's Adventure of Link. Sorry.
Yeah, it's the standard NES second game problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what is this? It doesn't even quite look like the first game. But then like these series kind of gelled into what people loved about them, maybe at a certain point, like to their detriment.
It's true. I think the thing is here, I do think a lot of it has to do with this target of getting it out with relatively more quickly than Ocarina of Time did, and so I think it was an easy thing to fall back on, of just like, basically we're going to hit. Or, we want it to, Ocarina of Time was one of the biggest successes on the N64, so we want it to hit, a lot of those same notes, but we've got to get it out faster, so that leaves us less time to kind of reinvent it in a way, that would have freshened it up more, so that this is what we do. And so, they did that, they brought it out relatively quickly, and then, again, it was one of the better sellers on the GameCube, but there was still, and it reviewed quite well, but there was still this lingering sense of like, but some people weren't as excited about it. So the next time we do Zelda, we'll really do it as Ocarina of Time all over again.
Oh my god!
Which is Twilight Princess. So I mean, that is the problem. It's just like that decision of like, kind of doing this, kind of thing that looked, the aesthetic it's very much its own quality, but was actually under the hood falling back very much on the structure of Ocarina of Time. But then, because actually, people weren't that hot on Toon Link, and it got bagged on, and People want Jackson's Lord of the Rings now. Gave us, like Ocarina Redux Take 2, more Ocarina-y edition, and but now it's got the Balrog. So like that decision to like rush this game, I think kind of spoiled like the next two Zelda games in a way. I feel like I just it was a little bit curious to me. Just the fact that it's like the time that it took to make it paid off. So like that, why would you mess with that? I really kind of still find that questionable. So expediting all the other stuff is one thing. Expedited Zelda was a mistake, I think.
So Xander had posted in the forums. You posted a long thing, and I might pull some of it later. But he talks about how much he loves the children's cartoon approach and how appealing it was to him as a kid. Now we talked about this when Xander was on a couple weeks ago. Animation is what he went to school for, so that makes sense. But the one thing this game does, or at least purports to do, is that it's much more open. This is Link's out on the open sea. He's never left there before. As Xander points it out, said that it captured the feeling of leaving home. Like it does a really good job of doing that. But he notes, but in a game teasing the expansive sea, it's interesting to lock the player into a linear path for the majority of the opening. I recall playing the opening for the first time and being excited by my quest, the scope of the mystery going anywhere on the horizon waiting for me, and then being a little confused why I, quote, had to go from points A to B to C. He's right. The start of the game, like the whole thing about this game that makes it so unique and interesting is that you have this big open sea you can travel. The other Zelda games, it would lock you in through some item, so you can't go here yet because you don't have item. But at least
more Metroid style, really, right. In that sense.
You can't get to Lake Hylia because you can't get over the gate. But
no, I kind of want to defend this though, because how much fun is it really to go to an island and not have the item that you need? You go to a different island, you don't have the item that you need. At this point, you're not even sure what the item that you need is. And I feel like they kind of had to lock you into a path until you had a few tools at your disposal to deal with at least, some of these islands, these puzzles that you would have to solve.
One of the things I think is salient here is that if that section of the game were a smaller percentage of the overall game, it would make more sense. But because it isn't that long in the second half, once it is more like kind of, okay, you've got the items to do whatever you want and all this kind of stuff. But that's not that big a portion of the game in some ways, like there's only 2 dungeons after the Temple of the Gods. And, it's just like, if it feels like it's always, it's like, okay, we'll have it more guided to begin with, and then it'll kind of let you loose. But, and obviously you can spend a lot of time, if you're trying to find all the treasure chests and, to accomplish whatever there is to accomplish on each grid, grid square of the sea chart and all that. But, in terms of the core quest, there's not that much of it left once you kind of have it opened up for you that much. So it just kind of feels like it doesn't quite line up with, because they probably just didn't have as much time to populate the second half of the game. And it's interesting, for instance, that the 2 temples, it seems like it's giving you the opportunity to do them in either order, but then actually it isn't. Because it's basically like, in each case, we've got this, as I already mentioned a few weeks ago, very much clearly what inspired like the whole champions thing in Breath of the Wild, where it's like, okay, we've got to kind of, get the champions, in this case, the sage's successor, to kind of take their place, to take up their mantle kind of thing. And it's like, okay, we got to talk to them, and it's medley, for the Rito, and it's, what is it, Makar, for the Koroks. And, Makar's just MIA until you do read the Rito, the medley dungeon. He's just, there's nothing seemingly in the plot that's like, it's just like, no, well, he could be there practicing his instrument with musical notes coming out of the waterfall or whatever. He's just not, because they just held it back, because they actually did want to force you to do it in a particular order, even though so many things seem like it's offering you the possibility to do it in whatever order you like. And I think even Ocarina, like, wasn't the Shadow and Spirit Temple something you could do in either order?
Yes.
You know, so, and these are the last two dungeons. So everything seems like you should be able to do that in either order, and yet you can't. So it's like, yeah, the way in which it's like kind of open, kind of not, it's muddled all the way through in that way.
It's funny because as someone who hadn't really played Ocarina of Time all that much back when Wind Waker was released, I feel like a lot of fans of Ocarina of Time tended to measure Zelda games by their dungeons, right? And I understand that now that I just completed it again in the 3D version, because they do make up a lot of that game. Like, the dungeons are the game, basically. There's just not that much to do outside of the overworld, really. And I you know, maybe like technically it is true that Wind Waker doesn't give you a lot of freedom in the way that you do the dungeons, but and maybe it's true that ultimately the content that is out there in the overworld is maybe, you know, doesn't add up in terms of hours to the amount of time that you spend in dungeons. But I do have a feeling when I'm playing Wind Waker that I do have a lot of freedom to go and dig around, basically, in an overworld and find out, like, oh, okay, what is this? Oh, okay, a mini game where I have to fly as far as I can. That sounds interesting. And then, you know, I do that. Like, this playthrough, I realized, like, wow, I've forgotten a lot about this game. And it was fun to get lost in it and to just find out, like, wait, what would they want me to do here? And then figure it out, getting a, you know, heart piece or a freaking chart or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I just had a lot of fun in the overworld. So it's not, you know, I understand, like, I'm not saying that it's not true that the game is more linear than perhaps it should be, or that it seems like it is. Like, it does. Yeah, it's very rigid in the progression, and you have to, you know, do those dungeons to get through the game. Whereas the content I'm talking about is optional. But I did end up really enjoying kind of getting lost, stumbling upon that optional content, and trying to do it, you know.
No, I actually get that. And that's much more when we're describing games, what would come off as a me thing, where it's like, oh, James just spent 40 hours in Xenoblade mapping one continent like a goddamn lunatic. So it's not surprising that every single playthrough of Zelda I've done, I've bought the map every time, which is completely not necessary. But
you're not really completing the game if you don't, James.
No, you're actually a baby who doesn't understand video games if you don't do that.
I would agree. Yep.
But how does the canon minigame on an island out in the middle of nowhere ever make any money?
Yes, there's lots of questions about the base. There's lots of questions about the economy in this, and I get that. That is one thing I kind of wondered about. I mean, at the end of the day, all these sorts of things are their own reward, you know, really, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like the mini game that the Guild described, which I guess isn't that really just a test of whether you've got the longer magic meter?
Yeah, no, it is. But that's
it. That's its only intention.
You find it, you do it. You know, it's its own reward to just, you know, to do the things that are there. But I think there is, especially when we get all the way to Wind Waker HD, there is a bit of a disconnect because, again, the original version of the Triforce Hunt and all that was in the Japanese game. One of the things that was changed, even just to the North American version, was that everything cost more and there were more charts to give to Tingle to decipher, which made it a lot more like genuinely kind of important to get all these rewards and treasures that are just rupees. That they had an important function to some extent because, you know, it would actually cost quite a lot of money to get all the charts deciphered where you were going to find the bits of the Triforce. Now, they already kind of new to the American version in 03. They're furthermore, you know, 10 years later in the HD version. And it does just feel like there's so much money out there. To what end? You know, like and again, I think that's because all those sorts of things they would have calibrated originally with the thought of, oh well, you know, we're asking people to buy this and this and this and translate these much, so we need a lot of money out there. And then when you know the feedback probably comes through from the Japanese version, and then looking at it again and thinking, we should really dial this back. Yeah, it's probably the right decision, but it does just leave like all these things where it's like, God, there's just like there's a money supply problem here. You know, if we're going to control inflation, we need to take some of these rupees out of circulation.
So what made me laugh was I came up upon the ruined island later, because you go back there for some quest or another. I can't remember which one. And I pulled in at night. And the degree to which they just give you money hand over fist in this game, I saw 3 treasure halos in the water as I was approaching the island, basically all next to each other. And every single one of them was money. It's like, okay, look, I don't need money. You cannot do this right now. This is unnecessary. I think I was going for a piece of the Triforce that's over there. But yeah, like also because there were so many more charts in the Japanese version and even in the North American version on GameCube, you went to more of the islands naturally. Like there are places now where you originally would have been sent there to pick up something. But at this point, there's no reason to go there. Like the only reason you go there is because it's there. And so those things are much less likely to be discovered. You know, one of the comments, I think this is actually back from, this was back from Noah, who notes that sometimes it's okay to just get lost. Like that's an okay thing for a game to let you do. And there's something enjoyable about just wandering around. And he's quite a fan of the original GameCube version of it. You know, he basically says that the GameCube version is being called tedious because there's no Swift Sail, and because the journey to find the eight charts and the corresponding charge is cumbersome. To those critics, I say, bah, the lack of Swift Sail brings a welcome I think he meant to say respite, but he says reprise. It affords time for one to rest their weary soul among the soft splashes of the salty sea and the enchanting tunes that harken back to humans' innate search for adventure. It's like, okay, I get what you're saying. But further, regarding the quest for the 8 Triforce charts, hast thou not spoken to the many fish in this great wide sea? Hast thou not taken their words to heart? For they speaketh only in truisms to define the location of each and every Triforce chart.
Ahoy, small fry.
Exactly.
That's a nice thing that I think was a sort of enhancement in this game, is that the fish's actual spiel for each grid square becomes sort of saved in the sea chart, right? You could just look at it on demand in your sea chart.
And they didn't change the fish's dialogue. So what he says the first time you meet him is, you better remember what I say because you're going to have to pay me again to hear it.
That basically cinches it that this functionality was not in the original version, was it? No.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I didn't even realize that until about halfway through this playthrough, and I'm like, wait a minute.
No, that's true. But I could kind of see what Noah was saying in that. I mean, the game was kind of that's the way it was designed. You know what I mean? That Triforce sort of that kind of length. Obviously, that was a kind of crude thing they did to lengthen the running time in the first place. But then the fixes are sort of equally crude, aren't they?
Right.
Just to take chunks of it out. So it's all just kind of a bit, it's still, I think, a net benefit, I think, for something that's not particularly great to go by a bit quicker. But, and really just if you do, as I did in the HD version, both times, completely map out the sea just for its own sake. You're doing that anyway, so you don't really need the Triforce on to prod you into doing it. But the biggest problem is the fact there just isn't any particularly interesting things in those places when you go there. You know what I mean? If it was better than just the same kill rooms again and again, if it was better than that little sewer maze that's underneath the cabana with the sliding tile puzzles. I don't think you would look at it so kind of negatively, you know, like if you could have had, like, even if it was a bit of padding, a bit of, you know, leading you here, there, everywhere, if there was a, you know, a legitimate carrot on the end of that string that was like, oh, this is like not necessarily some great big dungeon, but like a mini dungeon that's, you know, isn't all combat, or if it's got some combat
like Breath
in
of the Wild?
Yeah, well, you know, not necessarily that micro, but even if it had been that micro, that would have been better than what there is, you know. So, or if it was like combat stuff, it was something that had a unique element rather than just copy and paste. You know, that's the real issue with it.
By the way, sorry, but very quickly, that cannon shooting minigame in the middle of the ocean, like, how does it make money? It doesn't. That's why the guy is bored. Next question.
Yeah, well, how is he still alive, I guess, is the question.
Right.
If he doesn't make money.
Through the power of sheer boredom. I don't know.
Yeah.
I did, on the subject of, like, you know, what is the Swift Sail a good thing or not? TYP emailed us, Michael Cole, Radio Trivia Podcast Edition host, I was a long time, Ed Planet GameCube and NWR staffer, obviously was around when, you know, Wind Waker came out the first time. And, he said, I played the HD remake a few months ago, finally. Forsaken Fortress was as tedious and disorienting as I'd remembered, but I was surprised by just how much I enjoyed replaying the game while not trying to be a completionist. The non-Forsaken dungeons held up very well, and dare I say it, I think Wind Waker actually tells its story pretty well. Not too long, not too short, and pretty good designs overall, above and below the sea. Even the dreaded Triforce Hunt didn't seem so bad, though the copy-paste kill rooms were lazy. But then this is the kicker. P.S. I never got the Swift Sail. Don't. Or maybe I'm just old school. So we did mention this in the first part. It is weird how tucked away it is, and you can see the consequence of that. The poor old TYP didn't get it.
Because the Swift Sail is so transformative in that game. But again, like you said, it's so crude as well. I mean, it's so crude. Somebody did note, I'm trying to find the quote on that one. Oh, I lost it. That's fine. It's just kind of an amusing aside that the, is there any hint that you have to talk to the teacher to get to the cabana? And I don't remember. I just knew to do it because I've played this game 5 times.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's one of these things. I do remember that being the case from the first time I played. I think it's one of these things I probably relatively logged it quite strongly into my memory because it seemed random the first time.
Right.
So
you have
whenever
to collect a bunch of those things and then take them to
her. Getting the butterfly,
the joy pendants.
Yeah, joy pendants. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. So it's like it was one of these things. It's like I can't really put myself in the shoes of someone playing it for the first time now on that because it's like it seemed random the first time, so it became like etched in my memory. Like that's but like an important thing. It seems like the kind of thing that is just total side quest fodder,
right?
And
but it's not.
Under different circumstances, I'm sure that's what it would have been, but you know, like it got woven into the Triforce stuff, as I said, because you got to get access to that cabana to go down into the sewer bit, and you know, you do a few things there, which is relatively bespoke content for the Triforce Hunt, but it's not. It's a sewer.
Right. Again, this goes back to the comment I read earlier about how everything in this game is just fucking happenstance. Link happens to run into a bunch of kids who need to get their ass beaten, and as a consequence meets their teacher who likes to collect joy pendants, who just coincidentally owns a cabana that's sitting on top of a piece of the Triforce, or the Triforce map.
But yeah, for as true as that is, I agree with TYP about the fact that a lot of the storytelling I think is relatively strong. I like maybe, you know, not like all the plotting about how this stuff actually kind of, you know, occurs, you know, like to make it feel, you know, kind of cohesive and like somewhat natural rather than just, you know, entire contrivance at work or all day, every day. But, you know, like the cutscenes, the music, And, definitely kind of, the key moments of seeing the sunken Hyrule and then the climax of the game are really, really well executed. And to me, probably are still kind of high points for the series in terms of the kind of core narrative stuff. Obviously you think of like some of the kind of side story things that are very effective, in something like Majora's Mask, in Link's Awakening, but in the core kind of like, okay, Link, Zelda, Ganon, the fate of Hyrule at stake stuff, this is still some of the best they've ever done.
I mean, we can just cut to the chase here. The most affecting scene that I remember seeing it the first time. The end of the game where you stabbed Ganon in the fucking head.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like, wow, that's definitive.
That whole game, like we had just gotten to talk to somber Ganon, whose basic premise is, I mean, that we had this conversation, Greg, you and I had this conversation last week when we were talking about a certain character in Xenoblade.
It's shocking how similar it is, isn't it? Because like the thing is that obviously after this you get Twilight Princess Ganon, who basically doesn't know why he's got the Triforce. Like, from his point of view, it's just given to him. He's just like, oh, I guess I've got the Triforce of Power because I'm fucking awesome. So he's just an arrogant prick. Like, whereas this Ganon, like, from his point of view, he earned it. So he's like old and rueful and kind of like, yeah, I kind of got what I wanted.
He's also seen his hand blow up the world. Like,
so it's like, those parallels struck me as well. Also, Wind Waker has the ending that basically I thought that game should have had, in terms of the way that it's like, well, yeah, maybe we could have the world back the way it was, but it's too late for that. Too much has happened to, there's all these people that have made their lives tough as they are on these scattered tiny little islands. And, we can't, it's not right to just, say, oh, guess what? But, Hyrule's back on, bitches, no, the king forsakes that and says, let the young people have their own future. Don't give me back mine, kind of thing. Like that is to me, that always felt like maybe it's because of Wind Waker that it feels like that is the kind of natural way to approach a narrative like that is that,
I could have been a god once.
But yeah, like the way that you lay down the kind of the ending, I don't think I realized it, but it's basically well, maybe I'm spoiling something for someone, but we've already talked about how Miyazaki inspired this game is. Several, like Princess Mononoke is kind of obvious, and Conan, the Future Boy Conan, I've mentioned last time. But in this case, it would be like the ending of the manga of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Like it's this exact thing. It's kind of this exact choice that's being made. So that's really interesting. And yeah, like I find so I haven't finished Majora's Mask, so I can't really speak to the storytelling in that game, but going through Ocarina of Time 3D, I don't think I found any, like, it was very cinematic in parts, and I really got a kick out of that, but I didn't find this story, like, I didn't really find anything to hang on to. Like, I can't really discern a theme from that game's story.
It largely just goes away for long stretches. Like you get a plot beat and you get assigned a few dungeons, and then you might get another plot beat. Right,
but as to what that game is about, I don't know if I really see it as being about anything.
Especially in retrospect, with all the timeline stuff they've done, it's like, it's all about just like good intentions gone bad, isn't it? It's like, well, Zelda has good intentions to try and stop Ganondorf from getting the Triforce, but that actually gives him one piece of it anyway. And then, like, at the end, it's like, oh, Link, you should have a childhood. And then that is just the worst decision ever. Because that decision to send him away basically is, why you have the flood in Wind Waker. It's like, well, you've just deleted the hero from our world, so we are fucked when he comes back now.
Whereas, like, Wind Waker has a theme, and, like, it's almost spelled out, to you, but, like, just like the sins of the previous generations, being like the children having to suffer the consequences, and like we're like there's literally a speech where it's like we're giving you a ruined world, and sorry about that.
Yeah, but the bad guy gives it. Like he's like, we left you this destroyed world. I mean, that's the thing.
But the king also does.
They both do it.
They kind of. They come from a slightly different angle. Like Ganon is like, well, if your goddesses are so great, how come I fucked up the world, huh? And how come they flooded the world instead of just repairing it?
Then King of Red Lions is like, my bad, sorry guys.
The goddesses of Wind Waker are some Old Testament bullshit. They're like, well, this city's bad. Let's flood this whole fucking planet. It's like,
there's definitely some kind of muddled stuff here, because it kind of, one of the elements of the whole split timeline bullshit that makes a little bit more sense is the idea of, Link was like essentially erased from one timeline and sent to another. So, that's why there isn't a hero for a while. And that's what we're doing here, is we're sort of reconstituting the Triforce that was lost when he was sent away. That does make sense. But in this particular game, they're muddled about that, because they don't act like like the hero was just disappeared one day. They say, he went on a journey away from Hyrule and he lost his heroic element. So it's like, that's obviously an allusion to Majora's Mask, which happened essentially in an entirely other world, which I'm not even sure these people should know about. And how did he,
it's not him.
Are they coy that he's dead, or what? It just goes to show how little they actually had of this nailed down. How much they just hand waved it later, to come up with something.
I actually read it more as, people knew Link existed in Ocarina of Time. There were a number of people who survive Ocarina of Time who are intimately aware that he was a thing and his role in it. I took it more as when Zelda sends him back to have a childhood, that the people who knew he was there assume he just went on another adventure and he was gone. And he just never came back. Because he doesn't exist anymore. Like your point, he's gone. She aced him out of existence and sent him back so he could have fun, happy child. Oh no, he had the worst fucking time in the world and lived a goddamn nightmare. Thanks for that. I'm glad I'm getting to enjoy this. So, that was how I read it. Not that it was a Majora's Mask reference. More, it was just he stopped existing in that timeline. And then more bad But, how fast did things go south? Did Ganon come back, 5 years later?
Yeah, you'd have to think it was some significant period of time, but relatively,
Is it just because there was no Link in that era to score? Is that what it was? The bloodline end? What are they talking about? It doesn't make any sense. This is what timeline's bullshit. I don't care.
Well, it's just they revise it.
It was never meant to have a timeline.
They revise it on demand as well. You know what
I don't care how many videos we post over at NWR. No, I'm not backing down from this position.
No, they're always just
it was never really meant to have a timeline.
Well, that whole thing is just ridiculous. It traces back to the Miyamoto had said, back in, around about the time that Wind Waker came out, actually, we've got we have something, that we kind of refer back to, but, for our own, internal purposes of how all the games, connect together. And that might even be true, but the fact is they were perfectly content to just completely revise that when it's but we've got an idea for the new game, and does that fit in with the old? No. Well, then the timeline changes. The game doesn't change, because that's what's actually important to us is what we're doing with it. So, and then at a certain point, it became actually, we're not really satisfied with how all these things fit into two kind of split timelines. So what if there was a third one that split off from Ocarina of Time when you done fucked up, and you lost? So it's, you can't, take it very seriously and impose all that sort of serious things on it. But
people can.
Well, you can,
have.
yeah. Perhaps it's just not. It's not the best thing to do, shall we say? But I do feel like kind of in this respect, anyway. Like it was kind of a nice payoff to that weird moment at the end of Ocarina. So I thought it was weird when I played Ocarina for the first time. Of like, okay, he's been sent back, and now he's having we see him go to the courtyard with Zelda again. So it's obviously not the same as when you go back in time during the game. Right? Because when you go back in time during the game, you go back to a point where, it's already kicked off and Zelda isn't in the castle anymore. She's gone into hiding. Right? So it's like we've gone slightly further back and, it just freezes on that moment. So what, is none of this going to happen now? Like what?
Does he just go there? Is he just go there and go, hey, you're going to say like we should go get the Triforce. Don't do that. Just take my word for it. It's a bad plan.
So, I feel like at least it did follow on that in kind of an interesting way in that, well, actually, no, that wasn't like an entirely good thing. Like, like that. So it just like paid off it having some kind of importance because it always seemed like a weird note to end on.
Let's run the narrative here. So Link defeats Ganon, saves Zelda again, runs down a collapsing tower, and then Zelda's like, hey, we're going to have a big rager of a party, but I'm going to send you back so you can have a childhood in the pre-ruined world. And Link has no say in this. It just happens. She sends him back far enough that things aren't screwed up yet. Presumably he goes to the castle to go like, hey, you have a plan and it sucks. Don't do it. He then goes back to the ranch that he's never been to, steals a horse, and then gets sucked into a nightmare. Because it's not his horse in that world. Because that happens when he's an adult. So he just straight up steals that horse. And then gets sucked into Nightmare World. That's the future that Zelda gave.
Yeah, like I said, good intentions, not good results. That's the theme of certainly that version of Zelda.
It seems like Zelda's plans go sideways on a frequent basis. Triforce of Wisdom, you say? I'm gonna question this one. Is there not a Triforce piece for loose cannon planning? All right, so we're gonna break into the sacred realm with a child. That's definitely not gonna cause issues. Nah, maybe don't do that. Well, all right, you're gonna do it anyway, huh? Okay. Yeah. I mean, in this game, really. It's weird how much agency she loses when she transforms.
Yeah, I mean, it is towards the end of the game, but it's funny, actually. Like, something that a lot of Zelda games do is they like to return to a concept that was a narrative concept, oftentimes, not just gameplay ones, that has been in a previous game and, like, in a new way. Like one thing that I always think of is Skyward Sword just like reintroduces the idea of, oh, there's a Princess Zelda that sleeps for centuries. It just, that's a Zelda 2 thing. That's basically the core of the backstory to Zelda 2. But with Skyward Sword, it's like, yep, you know what? We're going to have that idea. And I think I've always read it as like, them not really so much encouraging you to think about this as a timeline where all these games happen and it's one canon, as it is so much of like, oh, these are different versions of the same tale. That kind of changed in the telly and people have different kind of ideas, but they keep referring back to the same concepts. And this bit is, in Wind Waker is very much just like the bit in Link to the Past where she's at the sanctuary, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, she's somewhere safe for now, where she will definitely get kidnapped later. So it's obviously with Link to the Past that happens really early, where it's like, oh look, it's the start of the game and you've saved Zelda. Wow. But then she's just, an NPC in that place for a little while before, she has to get kidnapped again. So it's just really kind of having that part of, that kind of beat is just transplanted to the back end of this game, whereas, that was at the front of Link to the Past.
And we've talked about it. I just love how she's characterized in Spirit Tracks, where she's kind of obnoxious. She is a bit of a jerk. But she feels more Tetra-y in that role than she does in Wind Waker, when she is explicitly Tetra. Like she's putting on a. Well, yeah.
No, go on, please.
I was gonna say she's putting on a little bit of a front because remember she freaks out anytime she sees mice, despite being a ghost and B in a suit of armor. Like there's a fun utility to how that character is built in that game.
Yeah, it just seems like obviously with she doesn't really get to be much of a character as Zelda, but then there isn't much time either, and then she's like again the fact that they kind of like to keep hitting these beats. Ganondorf puts her to sleep for some of that time. So, and then she wakes up just in time of the final battle and says, "Oh, I overslept." It's just kind of like a cheeky wink at the series lore. So, it's kind of, it's almost like the death of the character in a way, when she gets changed into the other one, which I don't know whether we really needed that, you know what I mean? Like, again, It just feels like you're kind of reprising a moment from Ocarina of Time, where it's like, we have Sheik, and then, it's Zelda, but that, at least, like, Sheik was a disguise, right? Because she's in hiding, because, Ganondorf's been looking for her this entire time that Link's been sealed in the Sacred Realm or whatever. Whereas, like, Tetra is the real her. So, I don't think we need a magical transformation into another form. It's just
also,
like...
why did the King of Red Lions feel like... Oh, no, I need to put a big red flag that she's the target. Let me just do... There we go. Problem solved.
But it's like this idea of, like, it feels like, again, more the idea of like we're kind of a different version of the same tale, and we're going to hit these beats from it. Obviously, a lot of that is just the fact that you could blame on them just not having that many ideas. Let's not forget the sort of just the path of least resistance element at work here, but also that's their sort of kind of cover for it. It's just this is the way it is with like myth and stuff. Like you get these same kind of things coming around again, but just remixed a different sort of context.
Let me hit y'all with a few questions from Top Hat Ant, because one of them is super relevant here. He goes, I'll end this on a few musings. It's a possible questions for the retroactive. This is the Tetra one explicitly. Why does Tetra's skin color change when she becomes Zelda?
Well, because princesses are fair-skinned.
Well, I think I think it was probably meant to be the idea of like, oh, well, this is what she would be like if she hadn't been, sailing the open seas her entire life.
Sailor.
Yeah,
she's like tan.
She's out there with the Ganondorf references it, when he's talking about the harsh nature of this world, that it's just, these vast sea with the sun beating down on it all the time. It's just like, whereas, if she'd been the kind of princess that was intended, she would have been kept in some castle keep somewhere and, never seen the sun, presumably.
So, on that end, about it being in a harsh world, is it right to put fairies in bottles when they look so sad?
They do look sad.
Very sad. They look extremely upset. Why does the dungeon warp take you to the first checkpoint rather than the next one for the boss? This one I found out as I was playing the game. You have to jump back in. It just sequences you 1, 2, 3 every time. So if you want to get to the third one, you got to jump into the first and then into the second. So you pop right back in.
Yeah. That was one thing I kind of liked, vis-a-vis Ocarina of Time, because Ocarina of Time you had Faro's Wind or whatever, which was a kind of an optional item. You didn't particularly, you could play the game and not find it, I guess, and you kind of created your own warp point and stuff. Like I kind of, which has its its merits, and they revisited that concept with the bizarre Uku thing in Twilight Princess.
God.
But I kind of like like the idea of set checkpoints that they know, and the dungeon is designed around them, and you kind of unlocking them. Like I think that just seemed like the more sensible way of having it, to be honest. And I'm kind of surprised they went like backwards almost with the Uku thing, even though it is it's always more flexible. But maybe that was just even
it's more
another function of the whole. It's even more ocarina-y like movement that was going on with that game with Twilight Princess.
What is the dwarf part of Ganondorf supposed to represent? There's a whole video. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the Ganondorf's name.
Dwarf is Dwarf on Golf, right?
Yes,
Dwarf is Dwarf on Golf. That's like Tim Conway.
Yes.
Does this mean that like one day Stevendorf will become like an evil Dark Lord called merely Steven?
Yes.
Well, he already did, though.
No, Steven is the personification.
That's the only reason why you know Stevendorf's name. It's because of Blaze.
Steven is the personification of evil. Stevendorf is a man who has ingested that evil. There's an entire video that got posted at NWR about the history of Ganon.
The name, even I know that the name Ganondorf was first introduced in the Link to the Past manual. And
correct.
It's so. I don't know how that relates to like the Japanese version of that manual exactly, or how much localization was involved. But I remember reading that manual as a child, and it talking about the fact that the Ganon that you presumably know from, A Link to from the original Zelda and the sort of the threat of him returning in Zelda 2. He was once a man rather than a pig beast, and his name was Ganondorf Dragmire, also known as Mandrag Ganon, and all this. It's basically just like, okay, we're doing lore in this manual. We're doing very fluffy fantasy lore, and it's like, well, what do you have in things like this? You have characters that are known by a million different names, like obviously a very different character in substance, but not so much sort of phonetically. Gandalf, right? Oh, well, some people call him Gandalf Greyhaim, and some people call him Mithrandir, and some people call him the Grey Pilgrim, and then he's Gandalf the White, and just like,
none of which were his name.
It's
his actual name.
It's just like a fantasy trope of like, this character, this a big deal. People called him a bunch of stuff, right? And even more stuff with something that's an evil character. Again, the devil always has a million names or whatever. So it's like, okay, he's Ganondorf Dragmire, he's Mandrag Ganon, then he's Ganon, whatever. But then when they came to do Ocarina of Time, which is somewhat of a actual telling of the backstory of Link to the Past, although not exactly. That's why they ended up coming up with the whole Link dies concept for a separate timeline. This is where it actually matches the Link to the Past manual. Whereas, with Ocarina of Time, it doesn't really, because there isn't a real imprisoning war with like armies and stuff, because it's just you fix it as Link. But anyway, then they just said, no, forget Dragmire, forget Mandrag Ganon, it's Ganondorf, and that's, they kept some of that floweriness, but not all of it. And then, really just to have that moment at the end of the game where, all the bosses have the flowery sort of subtitles. Throughout, like, kind of bioelectric, whatever the bloody hell, all these sorts of different ones. And then when Ganondorf transforms into the big pig beast, it's just Ganon. There's no subtitle necessary. You know who this is. It's that fan servicey kind of moment.
Yeah.
By the way, did you guys know that Yoshi's full name is T. Yoshizora Munchakoopas? And this is not a made-up thing by an American marketing team or anything like that.
I don't know whether Ganondorf Dragmire is that level of, like, total invention by Americans or something, but yeah, this shows you the kind of stuff that was happening at the time, where it's just, and the famous thing with, like, Super Mario Brothers and, like, oh, well, actually, the blocks are people and all this stuff, like, there were...
What? Excuse me?
Yeah, there were some liberties taken in manuals and things to try and, suggest what was behind the sort of abstraction of the video game that you were actually playing.
Yeah.
But you have to be a particularly demented individual to go like, blocks are people. And that's the conclusion you come. That's how I'll fix the weird. That's how I'll fix the weirdness of this world. The blocks are people.
That all makes sense now.
Yeah, I mean, you're really thinking at the 10,000 IQ big brain experience there. Good lord. All right, let's go some quotes. I think we're kind of getting to where we want to go. Do we have anything from the Discord you want to bring up?
Well, the problem is I was using Discord as like kind of a note-taking device for myself, and then but people were replying with much shorter statements, okay. And a lot of them, like we've already covered a lot of the that ground. But I mean, Matt Zawodniak was a frequent contributor, but he started like he was the first to post, and basically saying like me getting ready to criticize a beloved favorite of the franchise for the third time in 12 months. Because of course, like he had played for streaming Wind Waker, and also there's been the Zelda
3D game club.
The connectivity has been playing through all the 3D Zeldas for the past over a year now. So
yeah, actually,
so this is kind of retread ground, you know.
Yeah, I've got Lemonade's email that he sent that was actually openly said was recycled from the 3D Game Club stuff. But it's a kind of an interesting journey in terms of talking about being 13 years old when it first came out and loved it. But never really finished the game. I think that was kind of interesting. So it's a few years later, I played through all of it, but lost interest near the end when it makes you refight the bosses. Now this, to put it in, this is really, it's not near the end. I mean, it's at the end. You fight those bosses just before you fight the final bosses of the puppet Ganon and then Ganondorf himself. And it is rubbish. I mean, that bit is rubbish. I know,
well, if at least like it just asks you to play them like in a different way, to maybe like, oh, this will be interesting. I used to fight Goma, I only had one item. Now I can use all of my items. Maybe I can kill it in a different way. No, we've taken all of your other items away.
Yeah,
you've got a grappling hook. You're going to use it the exact same way.
Yeah, the way they suggest it with the sepia tone is like almost you've gone back in time and you don't have your items again. So it's like, no, you just do the same thing, but you do have more hearts to make it even more piss easy. So, I mean, it's I know, again, it is something that we've seen in previous Zeldas, like I believe Link to the Past, Ganon's Tower has the 3 pre-Dark World bosses in it to fight again. You know, just kind of there, you know, so it's like, oh, well, this is something that's been done in Zelda before, so we can kind of riff off that, but it's poor. I mean, like, fighting Phantom Ganon a bunch of times is like not that great either, but I definitely didn't think it was as bad as just fighting those 4 dungeon bosses again. You know, that was really, really weak, to say the least. But I've got to say, oftentimes that part of the game, the last sort of gauntlet before the final boss, is not something I usually like in a Zelda game, because it often is much more like of a combat gauntlet than it is a puzzle dungeon. You know, like it's kind of, I mean, even Ocarina of Time has kind of a similar concept that's not as bad because it's not as leveraged on refighting bosses, but it is kind of like, okay, here's like a little sample of each type of dungeon environment that you've played through to get up to this point, and you just do a little bit of it, and then that helps break one of the parts of the seal before you can actually go and fight Ganondorf. And it's kind of like, well, you know, that wasn't that terrible or anything, but it definitely wasn't as interesting as the dungeons that preceded it. And, you know, like in this case, it's even more just like about combat. You know, it's the odd bit of puzzle solving with like, okay, replicate hitting the switches in this order or to, like create the portal. or whatever that, kind of it shows you how Ganondorf kind of escaped from the world below to the Forsaken Fortress. It's kind of a nice little bit of dual, like, world building, and it has a practical application for you to use it to get out of the tower if you want to go back to exploring the overworld. But other than that, it's mostly just combat, which, is not, that interesting, especially when it's literally fights you've done before. So it often felt like a bit of a weakness. Like, I don't think, it's been a long time now, but I don't think Hyrule Castle at the end of Twilight Princess is that interesting either, is it?
No, not really.
Yeah, I can't remember, but
it's more interesting than this. Like,
yeah,
Ocarina of Time is pretty dull. This is the worst one. This is
again,
by far.
It just feels kind of haphazard. I mean, I like the puppet Ganon fight. I like the I mean, it's not too much to it's mostly the cinematic kind of spectacle. It's just a really cool scenario of, basically the world is like ending around you as you fight Ganondorf with the water pouring in. Like, it's a great visual design moment. It's wonderful. And the fight itself is okay, but, there's not that much to it. You can just kind of, if you speculatively press the A button rather than, like, waiting to time it exquisitely, you'll do fine. It's not a high skill ceiling kind of thing, but, Lemonade did kind of go on in terms of, when the HD version was announced, he was very happy because he thought it was one of his favourite Zeldas, even though he hadn't actually completed it. And then completed that version and really, really loved it and considered it to be his favourite game. But, skipping ahead to now, and a lot's happened. So he said, Breath of the Wild is now my favourite Zelda, and my taste in games has evolved over the years. I enjoyed playing through Wind Waker HD this time, but I don't think I like it as much as I once did. I think Zelda dungeons just aren't my kind of thing. A lot of the time they feel like work. The sword fighting is not terribly interesting. After the first successful hit, it gets very button mashy. The Z targeting feels off, and the parts I've always enjoyed are the sailing and the exploration, just going around looking at the different islands. I've never bothered getting the Swift Sail. It's the second email that we got that just didn't even bother getting the Swift Sail, because I like the sailing that much. Plus, once you get the ability to walk with the cyclones, you rarely have to sail too far, which again, it's true. They hold back the warping, I think, until the second part of the game, right? You can't. The cyclone guy doesn't show up for you to shoot until then or something. It's something like that. But of course, the one thing that is always true about the Swift Sail, as we've said before, is the speedboatiness of it. Not having to change wind direction is something that I really appreciated about it. But yeah, that's basically it for Lemonade. I did mention that, the game is still great, and I miss the Miiverse functionality with tingle bottles. And if it ever comes to Switch, it wouldn't be as good without the gamepad. So yeah, I don't remember the tingle bottle stuff that well, but it did kind of force you to break tingle out, like as a story critical thing, which I don't think it was in the GameCube game.
Not really, no.
Again, I just don't recall. I remember from 2 months ago when I played Wind Waker HD that I thought it was a little bit weird that the tingle bottle was so prominent. Like, there's no way to avoid it. And yeah, I don't recall how it happens, what happens in the original. The tingle statues. Lots of people in the Discord didn't really know about them, and I didn't know about them until I looked up a guide, really, because I could see, like, wait, looks like there should be something here. I don't see anything. Then I think maybe I found one of them by accident, and then I looked it up, and I was like, this is kind of bonkers. And Matt Zawaniak was provides a lot of kind of context, or a lot of, like, he's done the research, it seems, on this stuff. He explains the game does not clue you into the existence of the Tingle statues. On the GameCube version, they were exclusively available through the Tingle tuner and could not be obtained without it. On the Wii U version, it was made so you could get them with regular bombs, but otherwise there were no changes made. Officially, their locations were quote-unquote revealed on Miiverse. So yeah, so since we don't have Miiverse anymore, I guess that we don't have that. So there's just these empty spots in each of the dungeons, and if you bomb at that spot, you might reveal a chest that contains a statue, and it's always funny because the statues are described like as slimy and like smelling bad of like old seawater and stuff like that. And Link doesn't always seem to be pleased to have found them. Like he makes a grimace.
As opposed to the things you dredge up from the literal bottom of the sea.
Right. Yeah, but also these are tingle shaped, so there's an additional reason to be kind of skeeved out. But it's so I found 2 of them, and I guess I could have found all 3, except I didn't bother to, because essentially you don't get the bombs for the first 2 dungeons, so you'd have to go back. So you'd have to really want to get those statues. You'd have to decide, like, you know what, I'm just going to go back to those first 2 dungeons and find that spot and bomb it. It's, it's a little bit like the photo quest. It's like, why would I bother?
I'll tell you one thing that really hit me with the photo quest was, like, kind of get in the camera, which that's in Tingle's, like, cell, isn't it, right? Or something, like, he has the picture box or whatever. But, like, you get it, and then if you try, like, use it, like, and then it's like, it lets you do selfies. Like, I'm pretty sure that wasn't in the GameCube version.
No.
Yeah, exactly. It's a new sad commentary on society.
We did. I think was it AG had a bunch of comments, and he mentioned the Tingle stuff in terms of, for the HD remake, the Tingle bottle is now useless, as in post Miiverse death. But even when the Miiverse lived, I preferred the GameCube version with the Tingle tuner. I did actually play with the Game Boy Link cable and use it a fair bit. I got several trophies and used it in a few dungeons to save on bombs. I have no strong feelings either way for Tingle, so I felt the hate he got was a bit odd.
Well, I guess, like, that was when we realized that Tingle from Majora's Mask was cemented into Zelda lore. So, like, as one of those things that will be recurring, just like all those tropes that you mentioned earlier.
Like I said, there were quite a few elements that made their way from Majora's Mask into this. We kind of touched on that in the last episode as well, even though far fewer people played Majora's Mask that did Ocarina of Time. They still kind of worked some of those in. And of course it was really quite shortly beforehand, wasn't it? Into the year 2000 that they did Majora's Mask. And then, Wind Waker coming out in Japan in 2002. It's somewhat natural of just like, okay, we're whipping this thing up fast. Let's, kind of bring over some of these things that a lot of people, they're hoping that more people were going to own and play the GameCube and Wind Waker specifically than actually did. They were probably hoping, there'll be all these people that didn't play Majora's Mask that'll be playing this, and ended up that the overlap was probably a bit more than they'd hoped, but I think it was the moment that it kind of cemented Tingle would be a thing for a while, although I mean, there's no Tingle in Twilight Princess, right? I mean, there's a character that's a little bit...
That game was too grim dark for him.
Well, some characters are a little bit similar, like Lake Hylia, that operate that weird thing that launches you into the desert or whatever, but nothing that's actually Tingle.
Right. Chris commented on the kind of the money, how it's handled in Wind Waker. He says... I think that it's a couple of things that Breath of the Wild does better, because we were talking about how Breath of the Wild, we didn't feel like the economy was broken, unlike in Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, where in Wind Waker, like, you'll fish out 200 rupees, and you've already got 200 rupees in your wallet. Well, I guess you get no rupees.
Yeah, that is silly,
Twilight Princess, it was like... Yeah, but Twilight Princess is like, oh, you know what? Like, this 5 rupees, I don't have space for it. I'm going to carefully close this chest again, to the consternation of completists.
Yeah, so it's not marked as opened on the compass, if you've got the compass and the map and all that. So, either way, it's kind of bad, isn't it, right? It's like whether you don't even... at least with Wind Waker, and again, I don't know if there were any changes in this regard, but it's like, it's pretty easy to get bigger, wallet, because Tingle's chart has the fairies marked on it that increase your wallet or something, so it's like compared to some Zelda games like the adult wallet or something, sometimes it's quite late in the game that you can even get access to it, and then in the meantime it's really your initial wallet size is really small, but really what you just need for that is something the thing is, you have a literal bank account in Majora's Mask, but that's very much tied into the whole 3-day cycle, and how can you have persistent rupees when you go back in time and stuff. But just for the regular Zelda games like Wind Waker or Twilight Princess, you should have just had you've got a bank account, and if it can't fit in your wallet now, it goes somewhere where you
give Link direct deposit.
You can withdraw those rupees later, and then the chest can stay as opened and accounted for. That's what needed to happen.
I mean, he can carry around 1 million bombs. He can't put an extra couple gemstones in his pocket. Come on, man. Yeah. You can have 500 pieces of fish bait.
But yeah, so Icarus' actual comment was, Wind Waker's increasing the cap to 5,000, I think, seems like it should help the issue of running out of wallet space. Ocarina of Time had a cap of 500, for instance. But they also increased the need for them to decipher the charts, so it didn't really change things all that much. You're just working with bigger numbers, which makes it even more frustrating in a way when you run out of space.
Inflation, we talked about it earlier.
Yeah, but then he says, I really sound down on this game, and it is absolutely one of my favorites. It's a game of such tremendous highs, but also pretty sour lows.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely do. I mean, it's as somebody, obviously you saw from, what Guillaume was saying earlier, I saw what Lemonade was saying, what we read out, it seems like if you weren't too leveraged on the dungeon aspect of Zeldas, that maybe Wind Waker landed better with you, because it doesn't have that many of them. What it has is not in TYP's comment it mentioned that they're kind of solid, and I kind of agree with that. You don't have the real clunker in there that, sometimes comes up in a 3D Zelda, but none of them, I don't know whether any of them really give me that kind of eureka moment that I had from, and some of that is just because you played more Zelda dungeons. I think I was older and wiser to how they worked, but I think they did pitch them not too complex. You know what I mean? It just seemed like they didn't. The whole game was pitched to be kind of pretty gentle, relatively. Certainly didn't have some of these more kind of complex ideas of the Great Bay Temple and Majora's Mask, where you changing the direction of the flow of the water and all this kind of stuff. They wanted to stay away from that, and they're kind of solidly enough executed, but kind of not really gonna make you sort of feel super clever for solving any of it. And I mean, I think one area, generally Twilight Princess has more dungeons, better dungeons, more interesting ones, but it does fall prey more so to the idea of this dungeon has a key item, and especially the back half of it is all about just using that item on its own. Whereas the thing with this is you get items more outside of dungeons because they haven't got that many dungeons to give you stuff. So it's things like the boots, for instance, you need that, or the gloves,
the ice arrows.
Yeah, these things. Yeah, which the ice arrows were optional in Ocarina of Time. You only got them if you did the Gerudo fortress thingy. But
they're not here.
Yeah, here you need them, but you don't get them in a dungeon kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff out of dungeons, so when you do go into one, it does at least feel like you've got a few different items you didn't have the last time you did a dungeon that might be used in combination, which they do a bit of, as we already talked about with the iron boots and the hookshot. So, I think I like that part of it. that it feels like you're bringing a bit more of a sort of a tool kit to a particular dungeon rather than just one tool, which is very much,
right.
Obviously what Link Between Worlds would be, because you literally might not even have the other items because of the rental system and the non-linear nature of that game. Which I think they tried to keep that approach for Skyward Sword. I think it was much more like, okay, you've got a kind of toolkit of items that kind of, keep using. They don't just go in the back of the drawer once you do the dungeon that's based around that, and that's it, and then of course that leads into Breath of the Wild, where it's like, no, we give you the Sheikah Slate stuff up front on the plateau, and then that's it. That's your toolkit for everything, and you always will have the stuff you need to solve any given kind of puzzle. You've just got to figure out how you can apply to it, kind of thing. So it's a kind of gradual movement that took us to that place from the hyper specificity of like Twilight Summer, Twilight Princess, and Link Between Worlds.
All right, so I think we should probably start. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to mention something that now I'm at the part where I'm reading my own comments on the Discord, but there was like a bit where there's at least two places where I felt like I was failing as a gamer, like the game was making me feel stupid, and I think it's maybe a failure of the UI, but so in the Tower of the Gods, the sequence where you call a statue that follows you to the next room to make the slab with the command melody appear, it's pretty straightforward. But then the game tells you to use the melody to control them in the next room. There are a bunch of enemies to kill, some platforming to do. And I guess by the time I made it to the next statue that you could control, I had forgotten that I'm supposed to wake it up first by pressing ZR before you do the command melody. And so the game, like usually like there's a thing that on the UI that told you what buttons do, but like there was never a call, like it didn't switch to a call icon for the ZR button. So I kept trying to use the command melody, like first, like at the feet of the statue, or like the statue was on a pedestal. So I would try it from, close by. It didn't work. I would try it then at some point, like I would use the grappling hook, and I would like hoist myself up and then use the leaf and fall down on top of the column that the statue was on. I was like, well, I'm right next to it. Surely the command melody will work now, and it didn't. And then eventually, like after, messing around for a bit, I remembered like, oh yeah, like press ZR to call. So I don't know, like that just felt like maybe an oversight on their part.
Well,
I think that there was enough kind of action between the first time that you use the command, that you use the call, and the time that you have to use the command melody on the other statues. Like enough action happens for you to forget about the call,
The other thing that reminded me of with that particular part is that it's definitely something that was amended somewhat in like the HD version, I think, in terms of like they sort of cut a few sort of steps out, like, because I think it was like when you would play the command melody again and again, like it would kind of go through the whole thing of the command melody playing out in the GameCube version, and they just sort of made it quicker in this version. So it's like, okay, we don't need the whole like, all right, you play it, and then then we have, I can't remember how the command melody goes, but it would be, the 4 beats or whatever, and then it happened. Kind of like they tried to speed it up a little bit. Basically because I think there was some continuity, I feel like, with these dungeons using the command melody, which you have 3 of them, essentially, because you have the Tower of the Gods, and then you have the ones with Makar and Medley when you're kind of, taking them over. And there was some overlap, I think, with the Stone Tower Temple of Majora's Mask, where you had to play the Elegy of Emptiness, I believe it is, to create a sort of statue of one of the forms of Link to hold down a switch, right? And again, it's like, well, every time you have to play the song, and then it's like, oh yes, you played that song. Now it plays, and now the thing happens, and all. There's a lot of friction there, and so I think with Wind Waker HD, they actually took some of that out by not having it play as much. But so I don't know whether anything else changed about that process in terms of what you were talking about with maybe the context sensitive call thing, or maybe because it was a little bit different than what you remembered is what screwed you up with that. Because it is amazing memory stuff sometimes, like what you do and what you don't remember, and how much something can like screw you up by being slightly different. Like it's like playing GoldenEye on NSO, and like you're in a level, and all of a sudden, they're just like, oh yeah, that's a fake wall. If I go up to it and press the action button, there's going to be body armor behind there. And there is. And I haven't done this in so many years, and it's a relatively trivial thing. How do I know this? And then you'll have something that's mission critical, that's like, okay, you have to do this in this order, and I've got no fucking idea. None whatsoever. So it may be just something about the fact that they tweaked those things there just kind of threw you off, and you was trying to do what you were originally doing, and it messed it up or something. But yeah, like there's definitely, they tried to make that aspect of it go a little faster, because it was kind of cumbersome in some of the same ways that Majora's Mask Temple was.
All right. Are we ready to start wrapping up?
Sure.
Okay. John, you haven't been talking in a bit, so give me your final thoughts on Wind Waker.
I mean, I like it. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Zelda. I mean, I don't know if I like Twilight Princess more than Wind Waker, but going back to it, I do appreciate. I am a little bit edgelord. What can I say? But the thing is, though, I think it's aged a lot. I think it's aged better than Twilight Princess has.
Yeah.
Just in general, I think it's probably truer to what I think the kind of core of the Zelda franchise is. Like, to me, it's like really about that. Like, the cartoony aspect, which was derided when it was released, is actually one of its core strengths now.
It makes it more timeless.
Yeah, it makes it more timeless, and it makes it more unique. Of course, like, it was used in Spirit Tracks and stuff like that, but I think the reason why it was even reused is because over time it became more popular. So, I mean, obviously I didn't play too deeply into it, but I mean, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it way back then, and I enjoyed revisiting it this time. So, yeah, I mean, I like it a lot. I think I'm fonder of it now than I was back even when I played it.
Cool. I would say that Wind Waker probably was my favorite Zelda, or Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask for its weirdness, Wind Waker for its just. It's just. I always thought it was just because of the deep layers of charm that they deliberately layered into that game. Like it seemed very much like that was their core conceit. But what I ended up realizing later is that a big part of it is because I have this sort of attraction to just exploring and discovering and finding and getting lost in a world and trying to find all the intricacies and stumbling across a thing and going, a person put this here. And 90% of the people will never see it, but I saw it. And that became much more pronounced in some of the later games Nintendo published, specifically Xenoblade, then X, then 2, and Breath of the Wild. And so, for the question of, is it my favorite one? No, Breath of the Wild is, because it absolutely leans all the way into that. Like, it's so sick with the idea that it almost sacrifices what would previously have been considered core Zelda conceits to do it. I do think, though, that Wind Waker, in its own way, is the most unique execution of the Ocarina of Time format. Mm-hmm. There's basically 4.5 to 5 games, depending on how you feel about Skyward Sword, that follow that format. I would argue Skyward Sword's a little bit outside the template because of a bunch of stuff, not just the controls.
Yeah, it's kind of. I always feel like it's more like, almost like an alternate. Like, what if Ocarina of Time had been more like Super Mario 64? sort of timeline of 3D Zelda, but obviously it still has a fair bit in common with the other 3D Zelda.
Oh, absolutely. But it has some departures that are very pronounced. But this one it does so, even though there's obvious gaps where the seams are hugely apparent. Like, this is a thing that was put here to fill a gap in a development timeline, and they're more apparent now than ever. And all the weaknesses are crudely fixed in this HD remake. I still have a lot of love for this game for what it is fundamentally.
Yeah,
it feels like an adventure more than I would argue Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask or even Skyward Sword. I mean, Twilight Princess do. Because, this is Link going out on an adventure basically on his own to go rescue his sister and do a bunch of stuff, and he gets to meet lots of weird people and have an experience, and it feels like he's traveling long distances, whereas Ocarina of Time, it felt like, wow, he's gone to Hyrule Castle. It takes all of 5 minutes to walk here from the place he grew up. What a great trip he's taken. This has a sense of scale and wonderment. And danger. There's literally like a Scylla and Charybdis moment in this world that it felt like was missing from the previous 3D games.
Yeah, like this feels more like I think it really rings true where you're like, oh wow, yeah, the castle's like right over there.
Yeah.
It feels more like a world that you're exploring rather than a bunch of locations crammed into close proximity.
Right, crammed into the confines of what the N64 is capable of rendering.
Yeah.
As Neil said on the Discord at some point, like the game's vibes are top notch. So I think that's basically what you're saying here. Like the vibes, they're very good. Even though the seams are obvious and the corners were cut and we can see it visibly. But
I haven't talked too much about the soundtrack, but it's very effective.
Oh yeah,
it's really good. Although
appropriate too.
The music is fantastic, but I gotta say back when it originally came out, I don't think I understood really people who were complaining about the quality of the instrumentation. But when you do, like the first time that you see the Tower of the Gods, where you go through it, I really felt it this time. I was like, oh, this could be so much cooler if
we've got so used now, haven't we, to like the top-notch instrumentation, not just for Zelda, but for pretty much anything that Nintendo put out, whether it's Mario Kart, anything like they tend to have, a lot of live instruments, so it's really good. It's kind of weird, actually, like Smash Brothers fell really far backwards, essentially, because like that, because it's got so much music, I guess, it's got quite a lot of synth, like remixes and covers that actually don't sound as rich as like the original music anymore. But the Wind Waker HD has some subtle improvements in instrument quality, but that's what they are. They don't like bring it up to the base, compared to the GameCube game. Obviously, it's not in line with like even Skyward Sword, kind of let alone where a lot of Nintendo series have gone since. But the compositions, all that, it's just it hits all the right kind of feelings in terms of when it needs to be adventurous, when it needs to be even, obviously it's mostly like childish, good fun kind of stuff, but when it needs to be more like somber or eerie or stuff like that, like it does have that in some of the pieces, obviously that's kind of generally a lot more of like Majora's Mask thing, or even, like to some extent Ocarina of Time when you think of stuff like the Shadow Temple or whatever, but, it still has a really good range, of things here. So, I think it's the atmosphere and the animation, the personality all the characters have. I mean, I kind of feel like, sort of like Forsaken Fortress, which is kind of derided because it's not that great the first time. You come back there, because they've got to get every bit of, use out of everything that they had in this game and all that. But I think like some of the genesis for that is probably just as a vehicle for like people showing you the animation, because you have to kind of stop and carefully navigate past the moblins or whatever. It's really like forcing you to look at how beautifully they how bouncy they are and how much they animate and all this personality they have, and they really wanted to show that off, because it is there, and it, much more so, than they were able to put into stuff like Ocarina and Majora. So it's just, it's still, is very, up there, I'd say, as a Zelda for personality. I mean, I think my feelings on it have evolved over the years also. I mean, I think one of the things at the time was, as John and James already mentioned, play Zelda on, play Ocarina of Time, and there is that kind of, for a lot of people, there's some sense of sort of wonderment when you step out into Hyrule Field and it's this big open thing and all that. But once you play the game and you kind of realise, they couldn't really do it, could they? There's not much in that overworld. It's not very big. It's kind of just like a glorified hub. They couldn't really do it. They couldn't bring like a Link to the Past type overworld, which feels really big and it's like dense and it's got all these secrets and it's interesting, in a way that the Ocarina overworlds never were. They just couldn't achieve that. So one of the things I was kind of hoping for, when I'm thinking about a next gen Zelda, was something that got us closer to that. And Wind Waker did not do that, to say the least. It barely has a landmass as big as Hyrule Field in it at all. You get this sort of tantalizing glimpse beneath the sea of old Hyrule, where you just sort of walk from, Hyrule Castle to Ganon's Tower. But, everything else is so very small, mostly concerned with conceding loading times and all this kind of stuff. But, that part of it, that part of what I was hoping for from, Ocarina of Time to get advanced on one day, it didn't even really try. So that definitely kind of was one aspect that kind of felt unsatisfied. But of course the funny thing was, when they did try and do that with Twilight Princess, it wasn't that great either. Because a lot of that was kind of, empty, wasn't that interesting, was it? The right. Kind of Hyrule Field stuff in that either. So, then with Skyward Sword, as I said, they tried more of a Super Mario 64 approach where it's we're going to have these more playgrounds and we'll remix things and get more use out of them and stuff. And, I guess, you didn't really get to that place where it's okay, let's, sort of what I was dreaming about in 1998, really until Breath of the Wild to some extent, although it's still quite empty. It's not dense the way that, an overworld in a top-down Zelda game is, of course, but still in terms of the feeling of, this expanse that you can explore that isn't, just a sea or whatever, they did it in Breath of the Wild. They really did that. And, that was, the moment. But that's the thing. In retrospect, that doesn't, really matter to me that much with Wind Waker when I play it now. It's we got there one day, and that's what, this is fine being what it is, so in some ways I kind of feel like I'm more happy with it the way it is now than before we kind of crossed that barrier of let's see, kind of what I imagined of, Hyrule in 3D more vividly than what the N64 could deliver. So, I feel like it's relationship with the passage of time is weird on a number of levels with aesthetics and game design and all that, but in some ways it seems more favourable, some ways less. But overall, it's something that still remains enjoyable to play, which, is no mean feat for a game that's 20 years old now, I would say, and a game indeed that has been iterated on as many times as it has, with the series in general. So, I still hope we'll see, cell shaded Link come back one day. Even though, as we said, the commercial juggernaut of Breath of the Wild, I don't know how likely it, maybe that's even if it's not the gameplay, just the aesthetics of that will dominate what Zelda can be outside of remakes for the future. But, I feel like it's just a really appealing kind of look that you should be able to maintain some kind of presence, and did, as we said last time, for some number of years, but it just seems to be kind of gone now, and that is a little sad.
It feels like they could have used it for the Link's Awakening remake, but they didn't. But yeah, as for me, like I joked a long time ago that finally a good 3D Zelda when Breath of the Wild came out, and it's definitely my favorite. But yeah, before Breath of the Wild, there was Wind Waker, which was my favorite. And I think a lot of that is, because of that feeling, those vibes of exploring and just, messing around and the big overworld, even as flawed as it might be, or as much of the freedom might be an illusion, in it. But replaying, Ocarina of Time recently, it really drove home the fact that I'm not a huge fan of the dungeons in 3D Zeldas. And, a lot of that has to do with, They seem so fiddly, so every step that you take, the progression in them is so kind of arduous. Like you have to put on the boots, push the block, and like in Ocarina of Time, you have to do that like several times because they reset after you leave the room. And then like you've done all that and there's a fucking locked door. And you realize I'm in the wrong spot. I was supposed to find a different chest somewhere. It's completely arbitrary, but like I was meant to take the left door and I took the right one, and that was the wrong choice for. Yeah,
I feel there's a little less of that in Wind Waker. Don't you think
there's a little bit less of it.
It's not as much
true,
like the maze thing, like that. Basically, like Link to the Past. No, when it's 2D, it's a lot of the maze dungeon design, and then Ocarina is like going more puzzle-ish, but it's still in the maze part of it, and the locked doors part is still the big part of it. And then Wind Waker, I feel like, is, again, probably because it was trying to be a little smoother, a little easier, gets further away, but it's still, very much informed by that at the same time.
Yeah, and it's better, the dungeons are better designed, they're a little bit more fun, like, and they have you do, like push yourself off, like on the leaf trolley or something with the leaf, using the wind, I don't know, like, so it's a little bit better, for the dungeons, but then, like, you get to either the wind or earth dungeon. Which one is with the little, Korok?
Wind, I think, is
the wind one. It felt like torture, because you have to put on the boots. No, but seriously, it's so again like fiddly. Put on the boots, face the wind, push the blocks again. Always pushing the blocks, and then you get the grappling hook, and you had to climb up, and it's just like get on that platform. Take your grappling hook, aim it at the thing, get to the next platform. It takes forever, and there's quite a bit of, you talked about like, you need to use your tool set more than just a tool. But then your tool set, you can only have like on you 3 tools at a time.
No, and
I found myself switching constantly because where in the space where you have to use the grappling hook to climb the platforms, you also have enemies that the hook shot, the grappling hook, whichever, they don't do anything to those enemies. You gotta have like some third tool to take them down, and so you keep switching. There's so many interruptions.
No, that's why it definitely, like the both for Ocarina, Majora, and Wind Waker, like the touchscreen, like inventory switching is really welcome because it doesn't stop that being fiddly, but it makes it a fair bit less fiddly compared to, obviously, the really infamous one is the water temple in Ocarina and putting the boots on all the bloody time, which is an extreme example, but, because you had to go to the pause menu for that in Ocarina. But it definitely helps a lot, I think, just to kind of make that switching less painful than it was in the original game.
Yeah. So anyway, just the fact that you spend so much time in the overworld world in this one, that you have fewer dungeons, actually, I find that a plus in general. And again, like it's just beautiful, and discovering all these Miyazaki references has been, a joy. It's just cool to see what influenced the games that you grew up with or that you played a long time ago. I mentioned how, I knew about chocobos and Nausicaa a long time ago in the Final Fantasy series, but then replaying it the most recently and realizing like, a robot fallen from a city in the sky. Well, that seems familiar. It's just kind of, a neat little thing to discover about games that you thought you knew very well. So, I had a lot of fun replaying it, and it kind of set me on a 3D Zelda tear, just playing through Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask, and soon enough I'm going to be playing Tears of the Kingdom. So,
well, on that, let's wrap this show up because it's there now. So, Greg, what there is a bounty of music you can pull from.
Oh, there is, but as I promised in the first episode, we're going to rejoin the Wind Waker symphonic movement or symphonic suite. I've seen it referred to as both, from the 25th anniversary concert in 2011. So last we left off, Link was just journeying down to Hyrule on the ocean floor, but now when we rejoin it, we get the final battle with Ganondorf and the credits theme, which is kind of the main theme of the game, basically. Which is I think we've used the original version of the credits theme before, because it's just really, really nice, really evocative, that Celtic flavour that Wind Waker brought to the series on full display. But also, because this is from the 25th anniversary concert, we'd have these themes brought to us with the oomph of live instruments that, as Guillaume already mentioned, this game, even in the HD version, does lack a bit. So you just bring in some of the really great music to life more vividly than before. So it's rousing stuff.
Cool. All right. Well, on that, it's time for us to go. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Later.
Bye-bye.